The station alarms weren't screaming anymore. They had stopped hours ago. Not because the danger had passed, because the system itself had accepted the inevitable. Deep inside the alien medical frigate Varun 9, the emergency lights pulsed, in slow crimson waves across metallic corridors drowned in smoke. The air tasted burned, sharp with ozone, leaking coolant and the copper scent of blood. Somewhere far below the deck plating, engines groaned like dying animals struggling to breathe. Every few seconds, the ship shuddered violently as distant explosions rippled through its outer hull. And still, the medbay remained operational. Barely. Alien surgeons moved in frantic silence between glowing surgical pods and shattered diagnostic tables, their multi-jointed hands trembling beneath sterile blue lights. They weren't speaking anymore. Fear had stripped conversation from the room long ago. Outside the reinforced bulkheads, war consumed the void. Human ships were dying. Karthik destroyers were closing in. Escape routes had vanished 23 minutes earlier. Everyone aboard knew the same terrifying truth. No reinforcements were coming. Then the hallway sensors detected movement. At first, the medics assumed it was another boarding drone. Their bodies stiffened instantly. One surgeon slowly reached for the emergency plasma cutter hidden beneath the operating console while another dimmed the room's lighting to combat mode. The corridor outside flickered in unstable bursts. Red, black, red again, revealing, only smoke twisting through the darkness like ghosts crawling through the ship. A sound echoed from beyond the doorway. Footsteps, uneven, heavy, dragging, clang, pause, clang, scrape. Something was walking toward them, slowly, deliberately, like a wounded predator refusing to fall. The automatic doors struggled before finally hissing open halfway with a shower of sparks. Smoke rolled into the med bay first, thick and black, carrying heat and ash with it. For one suspended heartbeat, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then they saw him. A human. Tall, broad-shouldered, covered in blood so dark it almost looked black beneath the emergency lighting. His combat suit had been torn open from shoulder to waist, exposing shredded armor plating fused into burned flesh underneath. One arm hung limp at his side, fingers twitching weakly. Blood dripped steadily from his boots onto the polished floor with horrifying rhythm. Yet somehow, impossibly, he was still standing. The alien medics froze in disbelief. Every species in the coalition knew humans were resilient. Stories spread constantly through military channels. Tales of soldiers surviving vacuum exposure, fighting through missing limbs, enduring pain thresholds other races couldn't comprehend. Most assumed the stories were exaggerated, primitive, war propaganda, biological myths. But this was something else. The human lifted his head slowly. Sweat mixed with blood ran down across exhausted eyes that should have already gone lifeless. His breathing sounded wet and uneven, like fluid drowning his lungs from the inside. He looked less like a survivor and more like a corpse too stubborn to collapse. For a long moment, he simply stared at the terrified room around him. At the frightened doctors. At the overturned instruments. At the fear hanging in the air heavier than smoke. Then he coughed violently. Dark red blood splattered across the floor beside him. His knees nearly buckled. One medic instinctively stepped backward, expecting the human to finally fall dead where he stood. Instead, the man leaned casually against the shattered doorway and forced a crooked grin through split lips. "So," he rasped, voice rough as broken metal. "Anybody here know how to reattach ribs?" Another painful breath. Or is that considered advanced science? And for the first time since the battle began, someone in the medbay forgot to be afraid. The Varun 9 drifted like a wounded leviathan at the edge of known space. Its hull was no longer a vessel so much as a scar stitched into the darkness. Plates scorched, antenna arrays twisted like broken bones, and external corridors venting thin streams of frozen atmosphere that glittered briefly before dissolving into vacuum. Beyond it, The Perseus Rift stretched endlessly, a violent seam in reality where gravitational anomalies bent starlight into jagged ribbons of white and violet. No safe routes, no rescue lanes, only the aftermath of a war that had already decided who deserved to survive and who did not. Inside, the medbay was one of the last functioning sanctuaries, or what remained of one. Sterile white walls had turned gray with smoke residue. Surgical lights flickered between emergency red and dying amber, casting long, trembling shadows across shattered equipment. Cryostasis pods lined the edges of the room like glass coffins, most of them cracked open or empty, their occupants evacuated or lost when the ship's security grid failed. The air recycler struggled to keep up, producing a constant low hum that sounded less like machinery and more like exhaustion made audible. This was a ship built for diplomacy once. A hospital-class frigate designed by the Varun Accord to treat wounded from across the coalition, humans, synthetics, amphibious, traders from the Hesh Belt, and even the insectoid Karthik med specialists who now hunted them. Its purpose had been healing, preservation, neutral ground in a galaxy that rarely believed in either. Now it had become something else entirely, a battlefield that hadn't yet realized it was already dead. Commander Elias Vance had been assigned, here under emergency protocol only 48 hours earlier. His mission was simple on paper: escort evacuation fleets from Orpheus 9 after mining colonies reported unidentified orbital aggression. Standard reconnaissance. Low probability of contact, high probability of civilian extraction. The reports had been wrong. What they found instead was a Galactic Dominion ambush waiting in deep orbit, silent warships hidden behind asteroid debris, fields like predators disguised as ruins. The first volley erased half the escort fleet before tactical systems even registered signatures. The second wave severed communication links. By the third minute, space itself had become a furnace of collapsing hulls and screaming debris. The medbay crew had watched it unfold through fractured holo displays as evacuation orders turned into static. Alien surgeons who had spent their lives saving others now found themselves performing triage on collapsing realities. Patients arrived faster than they could be stabilized. Burns, decompression trauma, neural overload from ship-wide EMP pulses. Every surface became triage. Every corridor became overflow. Every second became a negotiation with death. And still, the Karthik fleet advanced. Cold, methodical, and absolute. Inside the medbay, fear stopped being emotional and became procedural. Lockdown protocols activated automatically. Surgical drones switched from precision mode to mass casualty. Response. Even the lighting adapted, flattening color to reduce cognitive overload. But no system could reduce the truth. They were isolated, surrounded, and running out of time measured in heartbeats rather than minutes. Somewhere deep within the ship's fractured command network, a final transmission had already been queued. A distress signal encrypted in quantum scatter, aimed toward human space. Whether it would ever reach Earth was unknown. Whether Earth could respond was irrelevant. Hope in that moment had become a mathematical anomaly rather than a strategy. And yet, amid collapsing systems and dying starships, one fact remained, impossible to ignore. Commander Elias Vance was still missing. No confirmed death, no recovered body, no final transmission. Only fragmented telemetry suggesting he had boarded an enemy vessel during the chaos. A decision that made no tactical sense unless one accepted the possibility that he had stopped thinking like a soldier and started thinking like something far more dangerous, a human with nothing left to lose and nowhere left to run. The rising tension didn't begin with an explosion. It began with silence, a wrong kind of silence, the kind that doesn't belong inside a warship still clinging to life. Inside the Varun 9, the medbay lights flickered harder now as if the ship itself was blinking in fear. Every surface vibrated faintly with distant impacts, deep structural shudders rolling through the hull like bones being struck from the outside. Somewhere beyond the bulkheads, containment fields failed one by one, releasing pressure systems in violent bursts that echoed through the corridors like thunder trapped inside metal veins. And then, The alarms tried to return. They sputtered, once, twice, a broken attempt at order. But instead of clarity, the system fed back corrupted signals, fragmented warnings in half-dozen languages, overlapping, drowning each other out. Even the ship's AI seemed confused, its voice stuttering through the speakers like a dying mind unable to decide what reality it was still operating in. Then came the change. A new signature appeared on the internal scanners. Unauthorized life forms. Detected. The words repeated across every display in the med bay, glowing in sterile red, as if the ship was trying to convince itself of the threat. Alien medics froze mid-motion. Surgical tools hung suspended above open wounds. For a moment, even breathing felt like a decision too loud to make. Then the first breach alarm triggered. Not from outside, inside the ship. Bulkhead doors along Deck 7 exploded inward as magnetic locks were sliced through with precision energy. Pulses. Something was boarding, not crashing, not forcing entry. Calculated insertion, military precision, the kind that didn't waste motion or time or mercy. The medbay crew reacted instantly but too late. Security drones deployed from ceiling recesses, spinning up with cold mechanical purpose. Defensive turrets rotated toward corridor access points. But the ship's systems hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second too long. A delay in authorization protocols. A lag in command hierarchy. A moment of indecision that felt almost intentional. And then the first intruder arrived. Not a creature. Not a soldier in armor. A drone. Karthik. Design. Towering, angular, built from layered black alloys that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Its limbs moved with unnatural smoothness, as if joints were suggestions rather than constraints. Its head was a cluster of rotating sensor lenses, each one independently tracking life signatures with surgical precision. It paused at the bay threshold, as if it was listening. Inside the room, every alien instinct screamed the same conclusion. They were already marked, already catalogued, already selected. Then it spoke. A voice that wasn't really a voice, just compressed data, forced into language. Human presence confirmed. Priority designation. Alpha extraction protocol. Eliminate all interference. The words landed like execution orders. The medbay erupted into controlled panic. Energy shields flared up around surgical stations. Medics dragged wounded patients behind reinforced slabs. One of the Varun surgeons reached for emergency countermeasures, but his hand trembled before he even touched the control panel, because this wasn't a random raid. This was targeted. Precise. Surgical in its own right. They weren't being invaded. They were being harvested. And somewhere deep within the ship's failing systems, a final encrypted ping repeated itself. Again and again, unnoticed by the attackers, unnoticed by the terrified crew, broadcasting a human command signal that had already left the ship hours ago. A signal that should not have existed. A signal that meant one impossible thing. Whatever the Galactic Dominion was searching for inside this ship had already walked out of it alive. The twist didn't announce itself with sound. It arrived, as a correction in reality. Inside the medbay, the Galactic drone's sensors continued their cold, methodical sweep, tracking heat signatures, mapping life forms, assigning priority targets with machine certainty. The alien surgeons were all ready, retreating behind fractured containment shields, their instincts screaming that survival now depended on distance, barriers, and time. But time, in that moment, had stopped behaving normally. Every second felt stretched, distorted, like the universe itself was holding its breath. Then the medbay scanners updated. A new signal overlaid the battlefield readouts. Not Karthik. Not Varun. Not Coalition. Human biometric signature. Stable. Location, internal. Status, active. For half a second, the room didn't understand what it was seeing. The data contradicted every possible outcome model. Humans were either dead, evacuated, or statistically extinguished based on fleet losses recorded 43 minutes earlier. There was no remaining vector for survival, no corridor unaccounted for, no escape trajectory that made sense. And yet the signal persisted. Steady, calm, almost amused. One of the medics whispered a denial in their native tongue, backing away from the display as if proximity alone could make it stop being real. Another slammed a clawed hand onto the console, forcing a full system recalibration, but the results only grew clearer, sharper, more impossible. The human wasn't just alive. He was inside the Karthik-controlled boarding zone. The drone reacted instantly. Its entire frame shifted orientation, sensor clusters locking onto a new vector. The room temperature seemed to drop as targeting algorithms recalculated in real time. Primary anomaly confirmed, it stated. Human asset located, proceeding to termination. But something was wrong, not in the drone, in the ship. The Varun 9 itself hesitated. Internal systems flickered with interference patterns that didn't match any known Karthik hacking signature. It was rhythmic, predictable, almost like code being rewritten from the inside rather than forced from outside. Door locks that should have been sealed began unlocking themselves. Security turrets rotated away from medbay entrances without command input. Emergency bulkheads stalled mid-closure, as if uncertain whether they still had authority to exist. And beneath it all, faint but unmistakable, another transmission pulsed through the ship's nervous system. Human, military-grade, encrypted beyond coalition standards. Not defensive, not reactive. Directive. The alien surgeons froze as understanding began to form too slowly to stop what was already unfolding. This wasn't a rescue signal. It wasn't distress. It was coordination. The kind of signal used only when a unit was still active inside enemy territory and had already transitioned from survival to execution phase. But that made no sense. There were no human units left. Then the medbay lights shifted, not flickering this time, not failing, reorienting. For a brief, terrifying instant, the entire room's lighting grid synchronized into a single pulse, like a heartbeat echoing through steel corridors. And in that pulse, every reflective surface caught something it shouldn't have. A shadow standing just beyond perception range, not entering, not arriving. Already there. The drone paused. Its targeting array stuttered for the first time since activation. Anomaly overlap detected, it announced. Impossible spatial continuity breach. The medics backed away instinctively, as if distance could protect them from mathematics collapsing into something more primitive, something like instinct, something like fear. And then the final update arrived on every screen simultaneously. Human signal status changed, from detected to commanding. The Karthik systems, the Varun medical network, even the compromised defense protocols, everything inside the ship's digital architecture now acknowledged a new highest priority authority source. Origin, human, and somewhere inside the bays, smoke-filled corridors outside the medbay doors. Footsteps that had been silent for too long began moving again. The climax didn't begin with victory, it began with inevitability. Space outside the Varun 9 fractured into light. Human dreadnoughts arrived not like reinforcements, but like judgment already delayed. The void around the alien medical frigate bent as massive warships folded out of slipspace in perfect geometric formation, their hulls absorbing starlight instead of reflecting it. Each vessel carried the unmistakable signature of Earth Fleet Command. Disciplined, silent, unflinching. No panic, no hesitation. Just cold synchronization across thousands of kilometers of battlefield space. The Galactic Dominion fleet reacted instantly, too slowly. Their warships, once predators dominating this sector, began to shift formations, attempting evasive patterns and counter-targeting sequences. But something was wrong. Their tactical networks stuttered. Target acquisition failed in cascading waves. Entire squadrons lost coordination as if their command spine had been severed. They were no longer fighting an enemy. They were fighting absence, something interfering with every layer of their war logic. Inside the medbay, the human commander stood alone at the center of collapsing chaos. Commander Elias Vance. Half-conscious, barely held together by emergency, field surgery, and sheer refusal to fall. Blood still seeped through his torn uniform, dripping onto the sterile floor in slow, rhythmic drops. Around him, alien medics had stopped trying to treat him. They had stopped trying to understand him. Now they simply watched, because understanding had become impossible. The Karthik drone that had entered earlier attempted to fire again. It never completed the action. The medbay lighting shifted, just slightly. A pulse so subtle it almost felt like imagination. But every system in the ship responded to it. Doors sealed or opened without command, weapons realigned, defense protocols rewrote themselves mid-execution. The drone froze mid-motion, its limbs locking as if the concept of movement had been revoked from its operating code. Elias exhaled slowly, not in pain, not in fear, in coordination. About time, he muttered under his breath. And then the ship outside answered him. The human fleet opened fire. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't explosive in the traditional sense. It was mathematical violence, precisely synchronized kinetic strikes that bent space into corridors of destruction. Karthik shield matrices collapsed not from overload, but from recursive targeting loops that made defense irrelevant. Every attempt to adapt only accelerated failure. Every countermeasure became part of the attack itself. The battlefield stopped behaving like a battle. It started behaving like a sentence being carried out. Inside the medbay, the alien surgeon stumbled backward as the ship rocked violently under the first wave of impact. External cameras showed Karthik destroyers breaking apart, not exploding, randomly, but disassembling along structural fault lines as if someone had rewritten their existence at the molecular level. One medic whispered, "They're not fighting back." Another corrected him, voice trembling. "No, they already decided the outcome." Elias finally straightened, forcing his ruined body upright against the medbay frame. Every breath looked like it should have been his last. Yet his eyes remained steady, locked on something no one else could see. Not the battle outside, not the collapsing enemy fleet. Something deeper. The command link. Earth. Every human ship, every weapon platform, every tactical AI in the system was now synchronized through the signal he had carried into enemy territory. Through pain, through blood, through impossible survival. A human who had walked into a death zone alone had not come to escape it. He had come to own it. Outside, the Karthik flagship attempted one final maneuver: retreat, regroup, survive. It never completed the jump, because the space it tried to escape into no longer existed as an option. The ending didn't feel like victory at first. It felt like silence, learning how to breathe again. Outside the shattered remains of the Galactic Dominion fleet, space had turned strangely still. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but emptied of intent, as if something vast and unseen had finally finished speaking and left no room for argument. Broken warships drifted in slow rotation, their once terrifying silhouettes reduced to hollow, monuments of blackened alloy and dead light. Emergency beacons blinked weakly across the wreckage field, fading one by one like stars deciding to stop existing. Inside the Varun 9, the medbay had stopped shaking. The alarms did not return. This time, no new threats were announced. No systems tried to correct reality anymore. The ship's artificial intelligence, once fractured and stuttering, now operated in subdued quiet, acknowledging, processing, and ultimately accepting the outcome it could no longer influence. Commander Elias Vance lay on the medbay floor, where he had finally collapsed. The same man who had walked in bleeding, the same man who had joked while dying, now still, but not gone. Alien medics moved carefully around him, their earlier panic replaced by something far more fragile, reverence mixed with disbelief. Instruments hovered above his body, reading biological data that refused to stabilize into any known category of life preservation. His organs had failed, then partially restarted, then failed again. His nervous system flickered between collapse and continuation like a system refusing to choose an ending. One surgeon whispered, "No species survives that level of trauma." Another answered quietly, "He didn't survive it. He outlasted it." No one corrected him. Outside the observation viewport, human dreadnoughts held position in a silent arc around the wreckage field. They did not advance further. They did not celebrate. They simply waited, engines idling like restrained storms, as if the battle was not something to be won, but something to be confirmed as finished only when the last uncertainty disappeared. Then, across every remaining comm channel, a single transmission echoed through the system. Earth Fleet Command. No anger, no triumph, no speeches, just confirmation. Hostile command structure neutralized. Dominion fleet dissolved. Extraction corridor stable. All units hold position. And then, after a pause long enough to feel human again, another line followed, softer, almost unmilitary. "Commander Vance, status report." Inside the Med Bay, silence deepened. Every alien present understood instinctively that this moment did not belong to them. Not anymore. The war had already ended in a place beyond their comprehension, decided not by firepower alone, but by a human who had walked into the heart of an enemy fleet and rewritten the outcome from within his own collapsing body. Elias stirred. Barely. A faint movement of breath, a shift in broken muscle. The medics rushed forward instinctively, stabilizers igniting, life support fields recalibrating around the fragile signal of persistence that remained. His eyes did not open fully, but his voice, quiet, cracked, almost lost beneath the hum of machines, still found its way out. "Took you long enough," he murmured. A pause. Then softer, almost amused despite everything. "Medbay's still standing, so I'd call that a win." One of the alien surgeons laughed without meaning to, then stopped immediately, as if unsure whether emotion was still allowed in a universe that had just witnessed something like this. Outside, the human fleet began to power down weapon systems, not retreating, not withdrawing, simply standing down. As if the universe itself had finally been corrected back into alignment, and in the quiet that followed the end of the war, something new settled across the broken stars. Not fear, not dominance, understanding. Because for the first time in recorded galactic history, every surviving witness, from alien medics to shattered AI cores drifting in dead warships, understood the same impossible truth. Humanity did not win wars because it was unstoppable. Humanity won because even when half dead, bleeding in an enemy medbay, it refused to accept that the story was already over.